What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. And recently a lot of people have been asking me how they can improve their DPS inside of AQ40, and I've done a lot of videos kind of talking about rogues and how they can do different situational things inside of AQ40, and I've also on stream been doing a lot of log reviews of AQ40. But today I wanted to put together my top 5 just simple and to the point tips that you can utilize to instantly increase your overall DPS or even just your singular boss DPS in certain situations within AQ40. Now, with that being said, I'm going to get right into it. And of course, if you like this sort of content, please like and subscribe, or let me know if I missed anything or there's something that you found that is a really good way to improve your DPS within the raid. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to cover is actually a little bonus tip. It's actually a little Mythbusters tip for you guys. And it's even something that I myself have believed from hearing it from other people, but I hadn't really officially tested it just yet. So I wanted to make sure that it worked before putting that in this video. And it actually turns out that it doesn't really do much. And that is that we've been seeing a lot of people talk about how Winterfall Firewater increases your actual hitbox because it makes you slightly larger, which can increase the range of your cleave. Now, I went to Blasted Lands with Thunder Buddy Falcon over here, and we tested out the exact range of our Blade Flurry multiple times with and without Winterfall Firewater, and we did actually conclude that increasing your size with Winterfall Firewater does not seem to actually increase the actual range of your hitbox with your cleave. So even though it does increase your hitbox or your character model enough in BWL where you can't grab the orb from down below, it should potentially influence your cleave range, but it actually doesn't. So this is something I really wanted everybody to know because it's something that's been a bit talked about recently and a lot of people are starting to believe it, but I just had to go in and test it multiple times just to make sure so you guys could know yourselves. So this myth is officially busted. Alright guys, with that out of the way, let's get right into number 1. Now, the first way you can automatically increase your DPS within this raid has to actually do with not even using DPS abilities. The best way to increase your DPS on a certain encounter, and that encounter is going to be Sarthe, is to have an optimal opener. And the reason for this and to know exactly what your opener is gonna be is because you're actually using more stuns instead of DPS abilities for the most part, unless your guild has other rogues completely doing that. But if you can stun lock the adds on Sarthe together at the exact same time and they never end up moving, you're gonna end up doing a lot more damage overall, even if you're not using all of your energy on abilities like Sinister Strike or Backstab. So what does an ideal opener for Battleguard Sarthe actually look like? Well, initially you're going to want to sprint to get in closer to the boss, open with a cheap shot on whichever ad is your target, then you can do two things, Blade Flurry and Sinister Strike, so that you're already getting your cleave off, and then use your Renataki's trinket. To get your energy back, you need 60 energy to cheap shot again, which is what you're going to do, Vanish, cheap shot, and then you can use another Sinister Strike before going in for the 5-point kidney. At the end of this, the adds either should be dead or you have utilized every stun you possibly can, and if the adds aren't dead, you're going to want to use evasion. Now, something that most rogues don't really know about just yet is that the spins and the actual knockback themselves from Sarthe and her adds are all physical abilities. So if you use evasion, you can maximize your uptime attacking the adds or the boss itself instead of having to run all the way back in after getting knocked back. Also, it's good because you're not taking all of that damage and you don't have to pop an early lip. This is a fight where you do want to always be ready to lip, and you're probably almost always gonna use a lip when Sarthe starts spinning again and you're just DPSing the boss just to burn her down. But if you have an optimal opener, it's going to change everything. You're going to get a lot more damage out of your cleaves itself instead of actually just trying to DPS one ad at a time, casually getting knocked back and then running around the entire room trying to get the adds either back together or just trying to get one of them down. If all of your rogues do this exact opener, then you should be able to burn down all of the adds before they move at all. So everybody will get perfect cleave off. A good thing that I should mention, right, is that dagger rogues. What about dagger rogues? Now this depends on how many rogues are brought to the actual raid itself, but if you're not bringing enough rogues to have 2 rogues on each ad, then the dagger rogues are going to want to use this opener technique as well, which means yes, you are sinister striking at the beginning because you need the energy to be able to vanish and cheap shot and to get off your kidney shot as well. Your biggest priority on this fight, and it's going to instantly increase all of your DPS because of the cleave and uptime fighting, is going to be to perfectly stun lock these ads. Okay, tip number 2. Tip number 2 has to do with Oro, and that again is going to be maximizing your uptime on the boss. Now, Oro has a similar situation where his knockback ability is again a physical attack. You can use evasion to dodge one of these knockbacks. You also can use vanish to dodge one of these knockbacks, and the third way to get rid of one of these knockbacks is either using a lip or a fap. Now the 2 differences here is if you use a lip, you take no damage, and if you use a fap, a free action potion, you will take some damage, but you can actually use that also to move in front of the boss as it's casting Sandblast to drop all of your threat. You do, however, take the full brunt of the damage of the Sandblast, so make sure that you're full health before doing this, but you will drop all of your threat and still be able to attack the boss. You won't get stunned by it, and you'll be able to have full uptime on the boss. Basically, you're not getting knocked back, and you're doing all of the threat drops yourself. So in an ideal world, there's either 1 to 3 knockbacks, and you can dodge all 3 of them. The first one would be evasion, but it depends on if your off tank is doing really well with threat. Some guilds have this happen a lot smoother than others. If your guild is struggling with threat, then you either want to vanish this first one, or you could use the FAP technique to drop all of your threat on this first one. But then on the second knockback, you have 2 options left. Of course, you do want to stay in and DPS this boss the entire time, but as we do know, a lot of times there are threat issues, so make sure you don't pull aggro and die. The third tip I have for you guys is to utilize different gear sets for different situations. What I mean by this is either if you're using Dark Mantle, or if you have already phase 5 bis, or if you had phase 4 bis even, you can swap between those sets. But then there's also situations like as a dagger rogue, on most of the trash, you're never going to be able to get behind and backstab. So you want to actually switch to whatever your main hand weapon is that could be best. For me, it's Claw of the Black Drake, and I use Sinister Strike so that you can be in the right position to 1, cleave, and to 2, not get knocked all over the entire raid. So a great way to utilize this itself is to use a weapon swap macro on your Sinister Strikes and backstabs, and that's just basically using equip slot macros on the 16 slot. So equip slot 16, for me on backstabs, it would be Perdition's Blade. And then on Sinister Strike, it would be Claw of the Black Drake. This is going to increase your DPS overall throughout the entire raid, not specifically on boss encounters, but overall throughout the entire raid, you will do more if you're a dagger rogue, if you're swapping out your weapons. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this also means gear set swaps. So there's certain situations where you're using different gear sets. There are certain fights actually, and this is something that could constitute a video all in its own entirety, you're actually going to want to switch out your trinkets. Different trinkets have different uses on other fights, but there's a lot of fights where you're actually using 2 on-use trinkets. Renataki's, as you use it first, only puts any other trinkets like Earth Strike or Jomk Bar or anything else on a 10-second cooldown. So this is an extremely high value trinket to use together with another on-use trinket. And lastly, with gear sets, like I mentioned earlier, you have the options of using the Dark Mantle set and other sets in different situations. There are times, like on Sarthe, where you actually wouldn't most likely like to use the Dark Mantle set because you'd prefer to have extra health. Even though having extra energy procs during the cleave phase can be extremely useful, sometimes it's just safer to have the extra health. Now, other situations where Dark Mantle may not be most viable are things like Twin Emperors because of the amount of uptime you have on the fight, or Cthulhu if you are daggers, because in phase 1, if you get a proc while the boss is facing you, you're not going to be able to get any actual backstabs off, and you're going to waste some energy using Sinister Strike, or even just waste some energy in general. One last thing I guess I should mention is if you're using on-use trinkets, right after killing a boss, swap them off and then swap them back on after you've cleared a little bit of trash so you can get the most out of all of your abilities. So be ready to do a lot of trinket swapping in here, because if you're using Earth Strike on one pull, then you can swap it off for DFT or Black Hand's Breath, and then you can swap it back on because the cooldown's so short. And that's just really a min-maxing thing that's slightly going to increase your DPS. Number 4 on this list is mobility on Twin Emperors. Using mobility abilities on Twin Emps can decrease your downtime switching between the two Emperors as they swap, and this just innately increases your overall DPS. So what I mean by mobility, you have a few different options. As you know, you have sprint, so save your sprint to use it during one of the switches instead of using it early to just get in and DPS the boss right away. It is a lot more useful to use it on one of these swaps, but you also have other options. Consumables. Swiftness potions. Swiftness potions are amazing, and they only have a short CD, so if your fight is actually pretty long, you can use 2 of them. On the very first transition, I would always suggest using a swiftness potion to get to the boss again quicker so that you actually can DPS him quicker. On the second transition, you're going to want to use sprint, and on the third one, you're down on your movement speed abilities, but if 2 more transitions happen, you actually have your swiftness potion again, so you can use multiple swiftness potions. Also, a very useful consumable would be the Swiftness of Zanza potion. This increases your overall movement speed by 20%, so this is extremely useful on this fight just to move back and forth, although it will overwrite if you're already using one of the Blasted Lands buffs or the stamina buff potion from ZG. There's not really much mobility past this fight, so it is a very situational potion, but it can be extremely useful here. And one last thing to mention for Twin Emps, as you are rotating, make sure to utilize actually your energy tick times with your slice and dice. So before you get back into fighting the boss, as you're running to it, right as you're about to have an energy tick that caps you out on energy, you can use your slice and dice right there, even though you're not already initially attacking the boss. This is just a way to min-max your energy usage. And a lot of times you will have enough of a slice and dice that it will last until the actual next teleport happens, and you can kind of just do that back and forth. Okay, tip number 5. And this is something that a lot of people are learning now, but it is that you actually drop combat in between the phases of Cthulhu so you can switch your gear. What I mean by this is if you are using certain trinkets, then you can swap them off as you are phasing over to phase 2 of Cthulhu. You can also eat if you forgot to refresh your food buff. You can switch your gear entirely if you're using normal Bis gear and want to go to Dark Mantle for phase 2 because you never have to move and lose any downtime of the boss facing you or anything like that. If your fight of Cthulhu is really short, you might want to use Renataki's trinket phase 1 and then swap it out, or even one of the 2-minute cooldowns, but you're going to have those back up. And if your fight is longer, you might not need to switch the gear. But this is just something really useful to know, that you can switch gear in between the 2 phases of Cthulhu, and you can also get your food buff out. So there you have it, guys. Those are my top 5 tips to right away increase your DPS throughout this raid. There's a lot more I can dive into and a lot of minute things that I will be getting into in future videos, but I wanted to give you guys just a quick idea of some of the things you can utilize right now to do more damage. As always, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Hit me up in the comments with what you want to see me cover next. And outside of that, guys, good luck out there, and I'll see you all on the next one.